The station appears long before any sign of a town. A narrow platform sits beside two aging rails that stretch into open fields and disappear into distance. The building is small, painted years ago in a color the sun has slowly faded. No crowd gathers here. No announcements echo across the land. The station simply remains, holding its place beside tracks that still remember movement. Morning arrives quietly at the station. A pale light spreads across the empty platform and touches the rails, turning the cold metal into thin lines of silver. The surrounding fields move gently under a slow wind, their tall grass bending in long waves. No engine sound travels across the land. No distant horn breaks the silence. The station waits the same way it has waited for years. Inside the station, the air carries the faint scent of old wood and cooled metal. A narrow wooden bench rests against the wall beneath a window that faces the rails. The glass holds small imperfections that bend the morning light into soft distortions. Dust settles slowly across the floorboards, shifting only when the wind slips through the doorframe. Nothing inside suggests hurry. The room exists in the same quiet rhythm as the tracks outside. The station keeper arrives before the light fully settles across the fields. His footsteps move slowly along the wooden platform, each step echoing softly against the boards. He carries a small ring of keys that tap gently against one another with each movement. The door opens with a familiar creak that the wind quickly absorbs. He does not look down the tracks yet. First he enters the station, as he has done every morning for many years. Inside, he sets his hat on the same hook near the door and pauses for a moment beside the window. The rails outside stretch across the fields in two thin lines that seem to narrow as they approach the horizon. No vibration travels through them this morning. The station holds its quiet shape around him, boards warmed faintly by the early light, while the deeper corners of the room still carry the coolness of night. He walks slowly across the room and opens the small ticket window that faces the platform. The wooden frame slides upward with a soft resistance, revealing the narrow counter where travelers once stood in quiet lines. The brass edge of the opening has been worn smooth by years of hands that no longer arrive. Outside, the wind moves lightly along the tracks, carrying the faint scent of distant grass across the empty platform. He takes a small cloth from the drawer beneath the counter and begins wiping the surface of the wood with slow, practiced movements. The grain of the counter shows faint lines where countless tickets once slid across its edge. Dust lifts briefly into the light before settling again along the frame of the window. Outside, the rails remain still, holding the quiet of the morning without a tremor to disturb them. When the counter is clean, he folds the cloth carefully and returns it to the drawer. The gesture is small but deliberate, part of a routine that has not changed even as the trains have grown fewer. Through the open ticket window, he can see the length of the platform stretching quietly beside the rails. Grass moves in slow waves beyond the tracks, stirred by a wind that travels across the fields without interruption. He steps outside onto the platform and closes the station door behind him with a gentle pull. The boards beneath his feet are worn smooth by decades of footsteps, though few now cross them. He walks the length of the platform slowly, pausing once to look down the rails as they disappear between distant trees. The tracks hold their quiet tension, two long lines waiting without any promise of movement. At the far end of the platform stands an old iron sign bearing the station's name. The letters have faded under years of sun and rain, yet they remain readable to anyone who comes close enough. He brushes a hand across the metal, clearing a thin layer of dust carried by the wind. Beyond the sign, the rails continue through the open fields, disappearing into distance where no train can yet be seen. He walks back along the platform at the same unhurried pace, following the quiet line of boards toward the station door. The wind moves across the open fields and slips between the wooden posts that support the roof above the platform. Far away, a row of trees marks the bend where the rails disappear from view. The tracks reflect the pale morning light, two narrow bands of metal stretching outward without vibration. He pauses near the center of the platform and looks down the rails again, not searching for movement, but acknowledging the distance they hold. The metal lines run straight for a long stretch before bending gently beyond the far trees. The wind brushes the tall grass beside the tracks, sending quiet ripples across the fields. Nothing approaches from either direction, and the station keeps its patient stillness beside the empty line. He checks the small clock mounted beneath the roof beam above the platform. The hands move steadily, marking time whether a train arrives or not. The glass face carries faint scratches that catch the light when the wind shifts the angle of the morning sun. He adjusts the clock slightly so it hangs straight again. The rails below remain silent, holding their long stretch across the fields without a tremor. He returns inside the station and pulls a wooden chair toward the window that faces the tracks. The legs scrape lightly across the floorboards before settling into place. From here, he can see the full length of the platform and the beginning of the rails as they move away into the fields. The room remains quiet, except for the slow rhythm of wind brushing along the outer walls of the building. He sits in the chair and rests his hands lightly on the wooden armrests, looking out through the window at the empty platform. The rails run straight across the open land, reflecting a pale strip of morning light before bending beyond the distant trees. The station holds its quiet around him, walls warmed slowly by the sun, while the deeper corners of the room still carry the cool air of the early hour. From the chair, he watches the rails without expectation. The metal holds a faint shine where the morning light touches it, while the sides remain dark with age and weather. A small gust of wind passes across the platform and lifts a few dry leaves that have gathered near the edge of the boards. They slide quietly along the wood before settling again beside the tracks, where no train has disturbed them for days. After a while, he stands and walks toward the narrow shelf beside the ticket window. A small ledger rests there, its cover worn smooth by years of careful handling. He opens it slowly and turns a few pages filled with old entries marking trains that once stopped here each day. The ink has faded slightly, but the dates remain clear, holding a record of movement that the station rarely sees now. He turns another page in the ledger and runs a finger lightly along the rows of dates and times written in careful handwriting. Each line marks a train that once arrived, doors opening briefly before continuing along the line. The pages grow emptier toward the present year, the entries spaced farther apart. He closes the book gently and leaves it where it rests, the quiet of the room settling around it again. He steps back outside onto the platform and lets the station door close softly behind him. The air feels warmer now, though the wind still moves steadily across the open fields. He walks to the edge of the platform and looks down along the rails once more. The metal lines stretch outward with patient certainty, disappearing between distant trees where the land begins to rise slightly beyond the fields. He walks slowly along the platform, counting the wooden boards beneath his feet without realizing it. Each plank carries the faint marks of weather and time, edges softened by years of sun and rain. The rails beside them remain perfectly straight, their surfaces reflecting a narrow band of light that shifts when the wind bends the tall grass nearby. The station holds its quiet beside the tracks, waiting in the same patient rhythm that has shaped every morning here. At the far end of the platform, he stops beside a small iron post that once held a signal lantern. The hook remains, though the lantern itself has long since been removed. He rests his hand on the cool metal and looks again along the rails as they disappear beyond the trees. The fields stretch quietly on both sides of the line, their tall grass moving in slow waves under the steady wind that crosses the land. He leaves the iron post behind and walks slowly back along the platform, the boards answering each step with a soft, hollow sound. The rails beside him hold a quiet shine where the sun now reaches them more directly. Far across the fields, the grass bends under the steady wind, creating long moving lines that travel across the land and fade again before reaching the station. He continues along the platform, moving at the same steady pace that has shaped his mornings for years. The wooden boards carry the marks of weather, their surfaces faded and slightly uneven beneath his boots. Beside them, the rails stretch outward across the fields, reflecting thin strips of light that shift as clouds pass slowly overhead. Nothing disturbs the metal line today. The tracks remain still, holding their quiet distance without vibration or sound. He slows near the middle of the platform and rests one hand lightly on a wooden support post beneath the station roof. The timber feels warm, where the sun has begun to settle across its surface. Beyond the platform edge, the rails stretch straight across the open fields, their metal faces catching narrow lines of light. The wind moves steadily through the tall grass, sending quiet waves across the land that reach the tracks and fade again. He remains beside the wooden post for a moment longer, watching the thin line of rails run across the open fields, before disappearing beyond the distant trees. The metal reflects a pale ribbon of light that shifts each time the wind bends the grass beside the tracks. The platform boards creak faintly as he shifts his weight, a quiet sound quickly carried away across the empty land that surrounds the station on every side. He leaves the post and walks again toward the station door, the platform stretching quietly behind him in a long line of worn boards. The rails beside it remain perfectly still, their surfaces holding the pale reflection of the sky. Across the fields, the wind moves through the grass in slow traveling waves that reach the tracks and pass beyond them. Nothing approaches from the distance today, yet the station continues its quiet watch beside the line. He opens the station door and steps inside, letting the softer air of the room settle around him. The wooden floor holds the faint warmth of the morning sun, while the deeper corners remain cool and still. Through the window he can see the platform and the rails stretching outward across the fields. The wind moves steadily through the grass beyond the tracks, but the metal line remains quiet and without vibration. He moves to the window and rests his hands on the wooden frame, looking out across the empty platform. The rails hold a quiet shine where the sun reaches them between drifting clouds. Beyond the tracks, the fields stretch outward in long bands of grass that bend gently under the wind. No distant horn carries across the land today. The station remains in its steady rhythm of waiting beside the silent line. He stays at the window for a moment longer, watching the wind move steadily across the wide fields beyond the tracks. The grass bends in long shifting lines that travel slowly toward the station before fading again. The rails remain still beside the platform, holding their narrow band of reflected light. Nothing approaches along the line today, yet the station continues its quiet watch beside the tracks. He leaves the window and walks slowly across the room toward the station door again. The floorboards answer his steps, with a low creak that fades quickly into the quiet air. Outside, the platform rests beside the long rails that continue across the fields without interruption. The wind carries the scent of dry grass through the open doorway, while the metal tracks remain still beneath the pale afternoon light. He steps outside again and closes the station door behind him with a quiet pull. The platform stretches in both directions, its boards warmed by the afternoon sun. The rails beside it hold a steady line across the fields, their metal surfaces reflecting narrow bands of pale light. Far away, the land rises gently where the tracks bend out of sight, leaving the station surrounded by open distance and slow-moving wind. He walks slowly along the platform again, following the familiar line of boards that run beside the rails. The wood beneath his boots carries faint marks of years of weather and passing footsteps, though few travelers cross here now. The rails stretch outward across the fields in two quiet lines of steel, reflecting a pale band of afternoon light. Wind moves steadily through the tall grass beyond the tracks, sending long shifting waves across the open land. He stops near the center of the platform and looks again along the length of the rails. From this point he can see far across the fields before the tracks bend gently between distant trees. The metal holds a steady shine under the afternoon sky, yet no vibration travels through it. The station stands beside the line with quiet patience, its wooden walls warmed by the sun, while the open land continues its slow movement under the wind. He leans lightly against one of the wooden support posts beneath the station roof and lets his eyes follow the rails as they stretch across the fields. The metal lines hold a narrow shine where the sun reaches them through drifting clouds. Far out in the grass, the wind travels steadily across the land, bending the tall stems in long moving waves that pass the tracks and continue beyond the quiet station platform. He pushes himself gently away from the post and walks toward the far end of the platform once more. The boards respond beneath his steps with a low, hollow tone that fades quickly into the open air. The rails beside him remain straight and quiet, their surfaces catching thin streaks of light as clouds move slowly across the sky. Beyond the tracks, The wide fields stretch outward without interruption, carrying the steady motion of wind across the land. He reaches the far edge of the platform and pauses beside the old station sign once more. The faded letters carry the name of a place that few travelers read now. He brushes a thin line of dust from the metal with the side of his hand and looks down the rails again. The tracks continue across the fields with the same quiet certainty, disappearing beyond the distant trees where the line curves out of sight. He turns slowly and begins the walk back along the platform, following the quiet line of boards toward the station door. The afternoon light has grown softer now, spreading evenly across the rails and the tall grass beyond them. The metal tracks hold their long, straight path across the fields, reflecting thin lines of sky. Nothing disturbs their stillness today. The station remains beside them in the same patient rhythm of waiting. He opens the station door again and steps inside, where the air feels slightly cooler after the hours of afternoon sun. The room holds the same quiet order as before, the wooden chair still facing the window, and the ledger resting on the narrow shelf. Through the glass he can see the platform and the rails stretching away into the fields. The wind continues moving the tall grass beyond the tracks, while the metal line remains completely still. He walks slowly across the room and settles once more into the wooden chair beside the window. From here he can see the entire platform and the beginning of the rails as they run across the open fields. The afternoon light has softened into a quieter tone, spreading evenly across the grass and metal. Nothing approaches along the line, yet the station continues its silent watch beside the tracks that stretch into distance. He remains seated beside the window, watching the rails as the afternoon light slowly shifts across their surface. The metal lines hold a pale reflection of the sky, while the shadows of the platform posts stretch gradually across the boards. Outside, the wind moves through the tall grass in long, quiet waves that reach the tracks and pass beyond them, leaving the station surrounded once again by steady silence. He rises from the chair and walks back outside, letting the door close softly behind him. The platform feels warmer now beneath the late afternoon sun. The rails beside it continue their long path across the fields, holding the same quiet tension they have carried all day. He pauses near the edge of the boards and looks down the line once more, as if listening for a vibration that never quite arrives. He walks slowly along the edge of the platform, the boards carrying a low, hollow tone beneath each step. The rails beside him remain straight and silent, reflecting a thin band of fading light as the afternoon begins to soften toward evening. Across the fields, the wind continues its steady passage through the tall grass, sending long shifting waves across the land that reach the tracks and move quietly beyond the waiting station. He stops again near the end of the platform, where the rails begin their gentle curve beyond the trees. From here, the line seems to vanish into the distance, leaving only the faint shine of metal beneath the quiet evening light. The wind moves steadily across the open fields, bending the tall grass in long waves that travel toward the station before fading into stillness beside the silent tracks. He turns slowly and begins walking back along the platform, the wooden boards stretching in a long, quiet line beside the rails. The evening light has softened now, spreading across the fields in pale tones of gold and grey. The metal tracks hold a faint reflection of the sky while the tall grass moves steadily under the wind. Nothing approaches from the distance. The station remains beside the silent line, holding its quiet watch across the land. He reaches the middle of the platform again and stops beneath the wooden roof that shades the station entrance. The boards beneath him are warm from the day, though the air has begun to cool slightly as the sun lowers across the fields. The rails beside the platform carry a narrow band of fading light, stretching across the quiet land toward the distant bend where the line disappears beyond the trees. He opens the station door and steps inside once more, where the air feels calm and slightly cooler than outside. The wooden chair still faces the window, waiting in the same quiet place beside the narrow counter. Through the glass, he can see the platform and the rails stretching across the fields, their metal surfaces now reflecting the softer light of the lowering sun. He walks slowly to the window and rests both hands on the wooden frame, looking out across the platform toward the long stretch of rails beyond it. The evening light now spreads across the fields in softer tones, touching the metal tracks and the tall grass that bends under the steady wind. Nothing moves along the line today, yet the station remains beside it, keeping the same patient watch it has held for years. He remains at the window as the evening light lowers across the fields, turning the long rails into thin bands of fading silver. The wind continues moving through the tall grass beyond the tracks, sending slow waves across the open land that rise and disappear again. From inside the station, the platform looks unchanged, its worn boards stretching quietly beside the line that still remembers the passing weight of trains. He leaves the window and walks slowly back outside, letting the station door close behind him with a quiet pull. The platform is nearly empty of light now, the sun lowering beyond the fields and leaving the rails with a faint, fading shine. The wind continues its steady movement through the tall grass beside the tracks. Nothing approaches along the line, yet the station remains beside it, keeping the same quiet watch. He stands at the edge of the platform and looks once more along the rails as they disappear into the quiet distance beyond the trees. The evening light fades slowly across the fields, leaving the metal tracks with only a faint reflection of the sky. The wind continues moving through the tall grass beside the line. The station remains where it has always been, waiting beside rails that may or may not carry another train tomorrow. If you would like to return to places like this, subscribe.